Okay, some context. My boyfriend, let's call him Joe, was diagnosed with epilepsy when he was a kid and has suffered from grand mal seizures throughout most of his childhood. They were apparently quite severe. Doctors all around the country didn't expect him to live very long. Joe would reportedly see things when he had the seizures. He would even hear things that weren't there, things he couldn't explain. What was especially strange, however, was that when he was around 19 or 20 years old, the seizures suddenly stopped, and since that point, nothing. Nada. It was a miracle, people said, a true God-given miracle. After beating all odds, my boyfriend graduated college, tactfully got Seize the Day tattooed on his left bicep the second he did, started his own line of bakeries, adopted 2 adorable border collies, and, well, he met me. And we've been living happily ever after ever since, or at least as happily as 2 middle-class proletariats in this economy can. That was all until 3 days ago, and trust me, there is nothing happy about what I'm going to tell you. Day 1. Out of all the days, this was the least scariest, which may not seem the case from the onset. Joe, oh my god, fuck, I said, my eyes swimming with tears, as I watched the EMT workers hoist my boyfriend onto a stretcher. He was convulsing uncontrollably, hot foam leaking out of his mouth, his eyes rolling in and out of his head. Again, bear in mind I said this was the least scariest of days. Ma'am, I heard one of the nurses say, ma'am, please step back. It's alright. It wasn't alright. This wasn't supposed to happen. Joe said this wasn't supposed to happen. I don't understand, I said hoarsely. I don't understand. We'd just gone to sleep, that's all. And then I heard him start to mumble something next to me. I couldn't make out what he was saying, and when I turned around, oh god, I hiccuped. The nurse put a comforting hand on my shoulder. Ma'am, has your husband? He's not my husband. Oh, sorry. No, it's fine. Has he had a history of seizures? Joe had now been loaded into the ambulance. The 2 EMT workers closed the door behind him. They'd asked me if I wanted to accompany him to the ambulance, but I didn't feel up to it. I turned toward the nurse, still shaking. Yes, he does have a bit of a history actually. I can't exactly remember our conversation past that point. It was long and technical and honestly very, very boring. I went to sleep on our couch shortly after, exhausted and worried sick. I'd called Joe's mom, who cut the phone as soon as she heard what happened, presumably rushing to the hospital herself. I'm not sure why I didn't accompany Joe to the hospital that night, but I had a feeling. There were a couple details I'd left out from my discussion with the nurse, one being that Joe hadn't actually made it to bed at all. I was already fast asleep by the time he had returned from, well, wherever it is he often returned from lately. You see, over the past couple of months or so, Joe's been disappearing for hours on end, always late at night. It was unusually particular. He'd first come home at 6 p.m. from work, smelling of butter and honey, freshly baked bread. Even though Joe was making more than enough money to not be working in his own bakeries, he insisted it was good for morale, and he genuinely loved baking, which I thought was sweet, and he continued to be sweet after this point. He'd ask me about my day, make me dinner, put on an old romantic comedy or 90s horror flick, and we'd be snuggled up on our couch with our dogs, laughing or hiding under the blankets depending on what we settled on. The only abnormal thing Joe would do during this time is check his watch every damn minute. Then he would promptly slip out from under the blankets at 10 p.m., mumble something about having to check in on the shop or needing to pick up his mother, and he'd take off, leaving me in the house alone and with questions. The first few times he did this, I didn't mind. I wasn't the kind of girlfriend who needed to know her partner's whereabouts 24/7. It was only when he started to do it every day, even weekends, when I really started to worry because Joe would only come back home at 3 in the morning. Joe wasn't sweet at all after 3. He was preoccupied, easily distracted, jumpy. The innocent switching on of a light switch would set the guy off, and his normally soft, gentle eyes would bulge out of their sockets, soullessly staring at me from the doorway as if he was seeing me for the first time in years. The first time this happened really freaked me out. I remembered giving a shout and switching the light off again immediately, unable to speak as my heart had leaped up so high into my throat. And the next morning, when I'd asked Joe what exactly he was doing so late at night, I didn't get a straight answer. I never did. He'd just laugh nervously, kiss me on the forehead, and tell me I worry too much, which leads me into the second detail I'd left out to the nurse, because I should have been worrying a lot more than Joe thought I was, given where I'd found him a little after 3 today, or how I found him, that is, naked, sprawled on the floor of our kitchen, shaking like a washing machine off balance, spewing thick liquid from his mouth all over the place. I damn near had a seizure myself upon seeing him. I remember the collies, meanwhile, whined and cried softly, circling around him as if they were in a trance. The reason I didn't tell the nurse any of this is because I, honest to God, thought I dreamt most of it up. I thought I dreamt up cleaning up after him, clothing him, dragging him from the kitchen into our bedroom, dialing 911 only after I'd done everything else. That last detail was probably the most disturbing. I counted maybe a full 10 minutes before seeing Joe on the floor of our kitchen and calling for help. If I didn't dream any of it, I don't know what came over me as to why I did it. It's almost like some external force had compelled me to do what it said, and that's not easy to explain to someone who dealt in the practice of sheer reality for a living, an idea that the next couple of days were the furthest away from. Day 2, I decided to pay Joe a visit in the hospital the next afternoon. His mother didn't take too kindly to it. However, how dare you? She hissed at me as soon as she was made aware of my presence. She was a short, stocky woman, incredibly overweight and very unpleasant to look at. How dare you leave him here all alone? How dare you not accompany my son? What were you thinking? I don't know, I answered truthfully. I wasn't thinking, I was wrought with worry. It was sickening. You're sickening, his mother spat. She luckily couldn't bar me from visiting Joe, however, given the fact that he'd put me down as his emergency contact and not her, so I was allowed to enter the room and rest my eyes upon the man I thought I knew, the man I might still love. I approached him cautiously. Joe. He'd been propped up in the hospital bed, an IV tube running from his arm and into the bag. His eyes were bloodshot, dead, and spit dribbled down his chin as he continued staring at the wall. Is he okay? I looked around at the elderly nurse who'd accompanied me inside. Oh dear, he suffered too much last night, the nurse said with a small toothless smile. His system is still in a bit of shock. I'm surprised his brain isn't coming out of his ears given the circumstances. Great. Thanks, nurse. How long will he be like this? All like, I said. We can only guess. Dr. Ball is still running tests. It's too early to say how severe the damage is, unfortunately. Hopefully only a week or 2. Hopefully. Okay, thanks. Of course. And the nurse left, shutting the door behind her. Joe and I were alone now. Joe, oh, honey, I said quietly. I took a seat right next to his catatonic figure. I'm so sorry. I don't know if you can hear me, but I truly am very sorry. Maybe if I called for help sooner. No response. Joe just continued to stare forward. I bowed my head down a little, choking back a sob. Teardrops splattered on the sanitized marble floors, tainting them, robbing them of their cleanliness, which is when I noticed his hands. Both were held up in the supine position, with the palms pointing upward. Not only that, but his right index and thumb were bent slightly. I felt a weird prickly sensation in my stomach when I saw this. It wasn't completely out of the ordinary, but it wasn't what I'd call ordinary either. I was so caught up looking at his hands, however, that I almost missed the fact that his eyes were suddenly on me, something I had the misfortune of finding out when I looked up at him again. Jesus. I sprung up at once, backing into the wall behind me and almost knocking over the IV pole. I didn't stick around much longer after that. Young lady, where do you think you're going? Joe's mother began as I burst out of the room, but I ignored her, my heart palpitating like it had never before. I stayed boarded up in our apartment afterward, disoriented. The dogs weren't helping either. I don't think I'd realized it until I got back home, but the two of them were continuing to follow each other in the kitchen, circling the spot where Joe had collapsed, something they were probably doing non-stop since the morning. Whining, crying. I guess I didn't dream any of it at all. I tried to lure them away with toys, treats, anything, but nothing worked. They were still in that weird trance. I considered moving them physically, but I simply didn't have it in me when I got close enough. When I looked into their eyes, both pairs of eyes reflected Joe's haunting stare in the hospital just a little too well. I then went to sleep with the door of my bedroom locked, ignoring all the missed calls that had been stacking up since the incident. Over half of them were from Joe's mother. Day 3. I woke up to the sound of people talking. It sounded like it was coming from right outside my window. What the hell? In true Joe-like fashion, I checked my watch and my heart skipped a beat. It was 3 in the morning. Joe and I lived on the second floor in our building, so noise pollution from the outside world was usually quite potent. I slowly slid out of bed, grabbing an empty bottle of wine from my bedside table to use as a makeshift weapon. Hey, I mean, you try coping with any of this shit without any alcohol. My gut roiling with foreboding, I approached the window, extending my hand toward the drapes. For some reason, I expected to see Joe standing there, which would have freaked me the fuck out. Don't get me wrong, but what I saw was much weirder. At least a dozen people were surrounding the apartment, ordered in a curved sequence. All their lips moved in a similar manner, issuing out what sounded like a chant. Free the master, break the bonds, oh God's messenger, only he knows what we're after. And that's when I realized the people were moving forward rapidly in that same curved sequence, the numbers increasing in droves. The bottle of wine crashed to the floor, but I didn't care. I unlocked my bedroom door at once, tearing into the hallway, panicking. I got to the kitchen, they continued to circle, but I ignored them, lunging toward the window by the sink instead. I snapped the latch and lifted the window upward, not only letting in cold air but the chance. I stuck my head out to get a better look, and sure enough, there were people behind my apartment too, circling around the perimeter. Free the master, break the bonds, oh God's messenger, the Messiah, only he knows what we're after. Free the master, break the bonds, oh God's messenger, the Messiah, only he knows what we're after. Free the master, break the bonds, oh God's messenger, the Messiah, only he knows what we're after. Men, women, children, people of all colors, all shapes and sizes, they circled around my apartment like it was an altar, unified in their message. I even recognized one of them, Ernie, Joe's business partner. I couldn't stop staring. Okay, surely I was dreaming now, right? But it wasn't a bad dream necessarily. I think I actually had half a mind to join them. The sudden ring of my phone broke me out of it. However, hello, I croaked into the receiver. Get to the hospital now. Something is terribly wrong. They won't leave him alone. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. My blood went cold. It was Joe's mother. She sounded absolutely hysterical. What's wrong? Just get to the fucking hospital. Yeah, okay, I'm on my way, I said shakily, cutting the phone hastily, my head swimming. I grabbed a coat and bounded down the stairway, exiting the complex. Free the master, break the bonds, oh God's messenger, the Messiah, only he knows what we're after. Everyone was much more terrifying up close, especially the kids. They didn't pay me any attention at all as I quickly passed, doing my best to avoid joining in, no matter how much I wanted to. A couple loud beeps cut through the chance when I unlocked my car, which had been parked opposite of the building. My breathing now sharpened from both fear and the chilly weather. I got into the car at once and stuck in the key and twisted it. I looked to my right, eyes locking in on the people again. Jesus, I raised my phone up and snapped a picture, just in case I had to explain this to someone later on. Then I stepped on the gas. I rushed inside the hospital as soon as I got there, almost slipping on the wet, icy asphalt multiple times as I did. As soon as I entered the seemingly abandoned building, Joe's mother, sweaty as a pig, her makeup nothing short of dribbling tar, grabbed me by the hand, pulling me as she let out a raspy, "Finally, please, I don't know what's wrong, they just won't leave him alone." Who won't leave him alone? But my question had been answered as soon as Joe's mother pulled me into the dimly lit ICU. Doctors, nurses, and other staff members, in that same trance, were circling around Joe's bed, Dr. Ball and the elderly nurse included. Joe, meanwhile, was still propped up in the bed, staring ahead as he was yesterday. Free the master, break the bonds, oh God's messenger, the Messiah, only he knows what we're after. They've been at it for at least half an hour, Joe's mother whispered. All I'd done was doze off, and when I came back to my senses, ain't nobody was around. That's when I found them all here. I don't understand. I just don't understand what's happening. I don't either, I said, my skin crawling with trepidation at the scene unfolding in front of me. What? Why did you call me? Why did you call me and not the cops or someone else? Because I couldn't. Could I? Couldn't. I repeated, and I pulled Joe's mother into the hall, having no desire to stay by the ICU. How could you call me but not anyone else? Oh, dear, believe me, I wanted to call anyone but you, but I'd lose signal every time I tried. I tried calling law enforcement, Joe's sisters, our friends, our family, but nothing. She sniffled. Desperate times call for desperate measures, so I called you. And here we are. Fucking typical, huh? I wasn't really listening, however. I was on the verge of a panic attack, to be honest with you. Mrs. Prance, I said, slowly. Let's pretend Joe's last name is Prance. Mrs. Prance, did Joe ever tell you what he saw or heard in those visions he had as a kid? During the seizures? No, he'd only ever tell his father, Mrs. Prance said. She wasn't doing a good job of hiding the bitterness in her voice. He only really ever taught me one thing. It's the only thing he told the doctors too, which is, she gave a strained mix between a laugh and a cry. Well, you've already heard it, haven't you? I don't follow. Mrs. Prance took me by the hand again, dragging me in front of the ICU again against my will. I really didn't want to go back. I had no desire to return, and yet I was here again. Free the master, break the bonds. Oh, God's messenger, the Messiah, only he knows what we're after. And Joe's eyes fell on me again, still just as soulless. And then his mouth moved. Free me, oh God's messenger, break the bonds. Just like my conversation with the EMT the first day, I don't remember too much after this point. All I remember is that I woke up in my apartment, in my bed. Later on today, I obviously revisited the dream hypothesis again, but that went out the window as soon as I noticed the shattered glass from the wine bottle on the floor. My visitors had all vanished. However, the collies had vanished from the kitchen too. The reason I'm writing this at all is because of a recent message I'd woken up to. Of course, it was from Mrs. Prance. It simply read, Joe is being discharged from the hospital at noon. A week or two my ass. It's 11 and I have no idea what to do. What is there to do except wait when another Messiah has evidently returned from the dead? Thank you to my superfans, Sweet Black Swan, Tacy, and Brooklyn. I really appreciate you guys supporting my channel, and I look forward to making more content for everyone.